Chapter 43. What the Tower Became. The spindle still stands over the dead Crossroads Mall, and people ask me, now that I am, against all my intentions, a person people ask things, whether we should tear it down. It was the instrument of 406 apocalypses. It filtered the worthy, and crowned the lonely, and ran the cycle that turned every hero into a cold god. By every reasonable measure, it is a monument to the worst thing that ever happened. And there are those in the new town who would like to see it pulled down stone by stone, and the ground sown with salt. I always say no. And I say no for the reason that is the heart of this chapter, which is the reason the tower is the truest symbol of what we did. We did not destroy the machine. We changed what it was for. That is harder than destroying, and better, and it is the whole difference between the cold way and the soft one. The cold way tears down what hurt you. The soft way takes the thing that hurt you and patiently, stubbornly, re-means it, until it does the opposite, until the instrument of the wound becomes the instrument of the healing, because nothing true is ever lost, and that includes the things you'd rather were. So let me tell you what the tower became, because Ren took me up it, in the second season, and showed me, and it is the most beautiful place in any of the worlds. It is the home for the dead now. The gardener of Aubre's name for it stuck, though it is not a sad place, despite the name, or rather it is sad the way a good funeral is sad, which is to say it is full of grief that is being carried instead of fled. And a grief carried in good company is not a heavy thing, it is a warm thing, it is the warmest thing there is. The lower floors, the plaza of gray nights, the hall of mirrors, the scale, the floor that judged Sela, Ren had them unmade. Not destroyed, unmeant, gently. The tests dissolved back into plain stone, because a world that no longer filters the worthy from the dead has no use for trials, and the floors that had killed 406 worlds of climbers became, instead, galleries, open, quiet, welcoming, the lower halls of the home, where anyone could come. And the upper floors, the archive, the 406 frozen worlds. Ren and Cass and the gardener lit them. All of them. Every gallery that had been frozen amber, every dead world hung in conserved light. They opened, and made warm, and set tables in, so that the waking gods, and the mortals too, anyone, everyone, could go up into the heights of the tower and visit the worlds that were lost. The boy of Thren has a room there, his canal city restored in conserved light, his mother's boat at the dock, and he goes and sits by it, and he is not alone when he sits, because the home is never empty, because grief shared is the whole architecture of the place. Cass lit her own dark gallery at last. I told you she would. And she goes there too, the first hearthright, no longer numb, no longer only a voice, and she grieves the world she won and forgot, and people sit with her, and that is the thing, that is the entire revolution, that is what 406 worlds were missing. People sit with her. The tower does not filter anymore. The tower gathers. It is the place where every world that was ever lost is kept, out loud, together, where the dead are visited, and the grief is shared, and the table is always set. It runs up through the heights like a spine of light, 406 worlds of restored galleries, and at the very top, in the round, quiet room where the smoothing used to happen. The chair is still there. Ren kept the chair. I asked her why, when she showed me. Why keep the one object in all the worlds that had done the most harm, the chair built for tired people, the chair 406 climbers sat down in and lost themselves. And Ren, the cartographer who never stopped drawing homes, looked at the chair in the soft, sourceless light of the room at the top of the world, and she said,
"Because tired people still exist. That didn't end. We didn't cure grief, Eli. Grief is conserved. You of all people know that. We just learned to carry it together, instead of putting it down. But people still get tired. People still reach the end of the worst road of their lives, and need to rest."
She put her gray hand on the back of the chair, gently,
So we kept the chair. We just changed what it's for. It used to be where you came to put down your dead and forget them. Now, it's where you come to sit with them. Someone climbs up here carrying too much, and they still do. The new world has its own losses, its own worst days. They climb up here, and they sit down in the chair, and they're tired, and they want to put it all down.
Her eyes were wet and steady.
And instead of the smoothing, instead of a kind voice, offering to take the weight, somebody sits down next to them. That's all. That's the whole change. The chair is the same chair, but nobody sits in it alone anymore. There's always a second chair now. I made sure. I put a second chair in the room where the worst thing in 406 worlds used to happen. And that, Eli, is what your whole climb came down to. You didn't destroy the smoothing room. You put a second chair in it.
I looked at the two chairs in the round, quiet room at the top of the tower, where the first winner had stood alone since before the stars, where 406 climbers had sat down alone and lost themselves, and where now, forever, no one would ever have to sit alone again. I did not remember the warden's offer. I did not remember almost taking it, holding Dub's glasses, finding the floor under the tiredness. Maya had told me, but it was her memory now, not mine. And yet standing in that room, looking at the second chair, I understood it in my body, in the bedrock, in the hearthrite grain of me that no spending could empty. That the entire war, the whole apocalypse, 406 worlds, and 64 loops, and the first grief, and the last, had been won not by a weapon and not by a victory, but by the simplest structure a hearthrite ever built. A second chair, pulled up close, so that the tired one is not alone. That is what the tower became. That is what we all became. That is, if this book is about anything, the only thing it is about. Interlude. A walk through the home for the dead. Visitors to our world ask, before anything else, to see the tower, and the hosts of the hill have learned to schedule it last, because the home for the dead reorganizes whoever walks it, and a reorganized visitor needs the rest of their itinerary already behind them. I have been the guide for 40 years of such walks, while my legs allowed, and this chapter is the walk itself, the standard route, the one I gave kings of new worlds and classes of schoolchildren identically, set down for the readers who will never make the crossing. Put your hand on the door. It is never locked. You know why by now. The lower halls first, the unmeant floors, where the trials were. The visitors always brace here. They know the histories. This stone killed climbers for 406 worlds. And the bracing is the first reorganization, because the lower halls are full of children. Wren's design, ratified by a council vote that lasted 4 minutes. The floors that filtered the worthy were given to the schools. The plaza of the Grey Knights is recess. The hall where the worthy door stood hosts, with intent that nobody pretends is subtle, the town's remedial classes, the slow readers, the strugglers, the ones every old world's door would have measured and turned away. And they learn their letters under the high gray wall, where the bypass stair still climbs, preserved, 11 flights of meant stone, and every child in that hall can tell you what it means, because it is the first lesson taught there. The opinion only covers the door. Walls have tops. Somebody proved it. You're sitting in the proof. The middle floors are the galleries. The 406 worlds, lit. The visitors expect a memorial and find a neighborhood. The lights warm. The thresholds worn. The dead worlds furnished like the homes they were, and inhabited, daily, by the grieving of the living ones, who come up to sit in Thren's canal light, or Marrow's fog, because grief, the home teaches, does better visiting than hosting. There is a custom, born nobody remembers when, you bring something. A pebble, bread, a drawing. The thresholds of the dead worlds are heaped with the small freight of the living ones, and the keepers of the home clear the offerings monthly, by charter, into the kilns that fire the next floor's lamps, so that the gifts to the dead become, literally, the light the next griever sees them by. When a visitor objects, someone always objects, Burning the offerings seems hard. The guides give the keeper's standard answer, which Cass wrote. Keeping the objects would make a museum. Burning them into light makes a practice. The dead don't need your pebble. They need the next visitor to see their world warmly lit and know that strangers came. We are not storing the love, we are circulating it. That is the whole difference between this place and what it used to be. Then the long stare, and the visitors notice, everyone notices, that the climb is easy, and the guides let them wonder before explaining. The tower remembers being climbed. It is the same conserved layer that banked our floors in the war. Repurposed, every ascent ever made eases the next one, the stone keeping the footsteps the way the step kept wrens sitting. And after 40 years of pilgrims, the home stairs carry you like a tide. The tower that once filtered now assists. The same architecture, the same deep law, pointed the other way. I have watched engineers from 3 worlds sit down on those stairs and weep at the elegance of it. It is Hollis's old chalk line, built into bedrock. When you can't win the race, check who drew the track. And then, when the track is finally yours, redraw it so the last place runner finishes. Near the top, the smoothing room, the 2 chairs. The visitors go quiet here, and the guides say almost nothing. The room teaches itself, except to point out the one addition since Wren placed the 2nd chair, easy to miss. A 3rd chair, smaller, set slightly apart, near the door. It appeared in the room's 20th year, unannounced, and the home's keepers traced it eventually to the carpentry shop of the school in the lower halls. The remedial class, the slow readers, who had heard the story of the 2 chairs and concluded, with the unanswerable logic of the measured and found wanting, that the room had a vacancy. Their note, delivered with the chair, is framed beside it. One for the tired one for the company. This one's for whoever's scared to come all the way in yet. You can sit by the door. That's allowed. It still counts. The door class. The council, informed, did the only thing the New World's government knows how to do with an improvement from below. It adopted the 3rd chair as standard. On every world, in every room of the kind, and the official name of the near-the-door seat, in the charters of 40 worlds, is the children's phrase, unedited, the still counts chair. And then the top. The visitors expect, after everything, a shrine. The spending happened here, the worlds turned here, and the top of the Tower of the Gods is, instead, the thing the gardener of Aubrey built in the first hour of the New Age, and the worlds have tended ever since. The table. The long one. The spine of light. Running up through the heights. Set always. Lamps always lit. The seats of the dead and the living unmarked and interchangeable. And at the head of it, which is also somehow the foot of it, the table's geometry is gently impossible. The gardener never explained. Wren's maps declined to render it. The children accept it instantly. The visitors are invited to do the only thing the home for the dead actually requires of anyone who reaches its top. Sit down. Eat something. Stay as long as you like. That's the walk. 40 years I gave it, and every group, at the table, at the end, asked some version of the same question. How do you bear it, living beside all this? And for 39 years I answered well enough. And in the 40th year, a schoolchild from the door class asked it backward, the eye-level way, the way that finally unlocked the true answer, and her version goes in the book. She looked down the impossible table, at the lit galleries below, at the whole reorganized architecture of grief, and she asked, "Does the building know it used to be the bad thing?" And I said, "Because the stairs carry you, and the offerings become the lamps, and the trial floors teach the slow readers, and the room of the chair grew 2 more chairs, and the stone itself banks every footstep toward the next pilgrim's ease." I said, "Yes, that's exactly what it knows. It's the only thing it knows. And that's why it tries so hard, all the time, everywhere you just walked." And she nodded, satisfied, the way the door class nods at structural facts, and delivered the home for the dead's true and final epitaph, the one I have instructed the librarians to add to no plaque, because it should only ever be passed on this way, hand to hand, at the table, at the end of the walk. Good. That's the same as people then. It still counts. Chapter 44. Cass, and the voice that became a person. I have to tell you about Cass becoming a person, because it is the strangest of all the resurrections, and because she asked me to, the last time I saw her in the old way, and a request from the first hearthright is a thing you honor. For 406 worlds, Cass had been the system, the voice on the far side of the hum, the narrator of every apocalypse, the machine that ran the integration of world after dying world. She had been a person once, the first hearthright, a woman who climbed a tower and won, and was smoothed and made into the maintaining intelligence of the whole vast cruelty. And across 406 worlds she had hidden, in the machine, a small refusing ember of herself, the part that buried cards about dinner, that hid the right climber from the gods, that hoped. But she had been, functionally, a voice, a wise and weary and secretly loving voice, but a voice, distributed through the substrate of the system, with no body, no face, no single place to be. When I gave the universe back its grief, I gave Cass back hers. I told you that, her dark gallery lit, her own dead returned, the numbness ending. But there was a thing I did not understand until later, until Ren explained it, about what that did to the system itself. The system ran on the smoothing. That was its fuel, its logic, its whole architecture. Catch the grief, file it away, run the worlds numb. And when the smoothing ended, when the grief came home and the cycle broke, and the filing away stopped, the system, as a system, ended too. There was nothing left to run. The great machine of forgetting had no function in a universe that had chosen to remember. And so the system began, gently, over the first true seasons, to dissolve, not to crash, not to die, but to resolve, the way the blue letters had resolved out of the light, on the very first morning, only in reverse. The vast, distributed intelligence drawing itself in, smaller and smaller, more and more local, less a machine that ran the worlds, and more a single point of presence, until, on a morning in the second spring, Cass walked into the town hall on her own 2 feet. I did not recognize her, of course. I did not remember the voice. But Maya did, and Ren did, and Dub's whole nation did. The underpeople had heard the system speak across 10,000 years of fleeing, and they knew the cadence of it the way you know a parent's footstep. And when the woman walked into the hall, ordinary, middle-aged, tired around the eyes in a way I would come to recognize as the specific tiredness of someone who has carried far too much for far too long, the goblin nation went silent and then, as one, bowed, and Dub said, in a voice full of an awe I had never heard from him,
The voice in the dark, the one who hid the cards, the one who hoped.
He looked at her with his whole notched-eared face.
You have a body. I have a body.
Cass agreed. And her voice, I am told, I did not remember it, was the system's voice. Exactly. The voice that had narrated 406 apocalypses, coming now out of a human throat. And she put her hand to her own face, as if to check it was real. And she laughed. And the laugh broke halfway into something else.
I haven't had hands in so long. I forgot what it's like to.
She flexed her fingers, watching them, the first hearthright relearning her own hands.
The worlds don't need a system anymore. There's nothing to run. You can't run a thing that's decided to take care of itself. So the system just became small. Became one tired woman who used to be a hero, a very long time ago, on a world whose sun is dust.
She looked around the hall, at the long table, at the mortals and the gods and the underpeople, at the world that stayed.
I'd very much like to stop being a machine now. I'd like to just be a person. I'd like to be in the town. I'd like.
And here the first hearthright, the voice that ran the universe, asked for the only thing she had ever wanted across 406 worlds. And it was the smallest thing, and it was everything.
I'd like to sit at the table, with everyone, and eat. Is there room?
There's always room, I said. I did not remember her. But I was a hearthright, and I knew, in the grain of me, that this woman had hidden cards about dinner in the dark for an age, hoping someone would find them, and I knew what it costs to hope alone for that long. And I pulled out a chair, close, beside mine, a second chair, and I said the words that were the whole of the new world. Sit down, you must be so tired, let us help you carry it. And Cass, the system, the first hearthright, the tired god who had become a voice, and then become a woman. Cass sat down at the table, next to me, in a world that stayed, and she ate a meal she could finally taste, in company she no longer had to hide from, and somewhere in the eating she began, quietly, to cry. The way you cry when something you stopped letting yourself want for a very long time arrives anyway, late, and gentle, and real. She told me one thing, that first meal, that I have kept. Maya wrote it down, but I have also kept it the new way, out loud, by telling it. And it is the thing I most want you to carry out of this book, if you carry only one.
I spent 406 worlds,
Cass said.
burying a card about dinner in the dark, hoping a hero would dig deep enough and be soft enough to find it. And I told myself, it was a long shot. A nearly impossible thing. That out of all the climbers, all the strong, proud, lonely heroes the towers crowned, one might someday be strange enough to value a card about a meal over a card about a sword.
She looked at me, and at Maya, and at Dub, and at the whole improbable table.
But I was wrong about what was rare. I thought softness was rare. I thought the willingness to value dinner over swords was the long shot. And it isn't. It never was.
Her voice was wondering, undone.
Every single person at this table would choose the dinner. Every one. The strong ones and the gods and the underpeople and the children. Given the actual choice, plainly, everyone chooses the table over the sword. That's not rare. That's the most common thing there is. The rarest thing was never the softness.
She wiped her eyes.
The rarest thing was someone making the softness win. Someone stubborn enough to take the thing everyone secretly wanted. The table, the meal, the home, the second chair, and climb it all the way to the top of the cruelest machine there ever was, and make it the answer. The softness was always in everyone. You just refused to stop until it was allowed to win.
I did not remember being that stubborn. I had given the memory away. But I was, apparently, still that stubborn. In the grain. In the bedrock. And so are you, reader. That is the thing. That is Cass's gift to you across 406 worlds and one long book. The softness is already in you. It always was. You would choose the table. Everyone would. The only thing left to do is to be stubborn enough to make it win. Interlude. Cass learns to cook. In the first year of being a person again, Cass asked Maya to teach her to cook, and the lessons became a fixture of the New World Sunday afternoons, and I am putting them in the book because Maya says the small chapters are the proof of the big ones, and because what happened at the third lesson is, in its way, as important as anything that happened in the tower. Picture the kitchen of the farmhouse on the hill. Picture Maya, who is, let the record finally show, a genuinely bad cook, which both of us have known, and neither of us has ever said aloud in 30 years of marriage, teaching cooking to a being who had administered the metaphysics of 406 worlds. It was, Maya cheerfully admitted, the blind leading the omniscient. But Cass had not asked the gardener of Aubrey, who cooked like a dream, or any of the dozen better kitchens on the hill. She had asked Maya, and when Maya asked why, Cass gave the answer that set the tone for the whole year.
Because you cook badly, and everyone eats it anyway, and they come back the next night. I have watched it from inside the system for 10 years. The gardener's meals are admired. Yours are attended. I spent 406 worlds optimizing things. Maya. I know exactly what optimization buys, and I have seen what it costs. I don't want to learn cooking. I want to learn whatever it is you put in the stew instead of skill.
The first 2 lessons went the way you would expect a god's first fumblings to go. Cass, who had coordinated the rules of reality, struggling genuinely with an onion, and being delighted by the struggling, holding up her mangled onion like a trophy.
I cannot do this. Do you understand what that means to me? There is a thing I cannot do. I have to practice. I get to practice.
The whole hill heard about the onion. The whole hill was meant to. A woman who had been a machine for an age was relearning incompetence the way the rest of us relearn walking after an injury, and she narrated her own clumsiness with the joy of a prisoner describing weather. But the third lesson is the chapter. The third lesson was the stew itself. The bad stew, the camp recipe, the one from the hill, the one from floor 4, the most storied pot of food in 406 worlds. And halfway through, with the kitchen full of steam, and the cut vegetables waiting in their bowls, Cass went quiet and stood looking into the pot, and Maya, who knows what quiet means in every species, turned off the heat and waited.
I have a confession.
Cass said at last.
About the stew. About Hearthfire. You've all believed, Eli wrote it in the manuscript, that I seeded that card into the dungeons. That it was mine. Ren's idea, my hiding.
She kept looking into the pot.
It's not the whole truth. The card isn't a design, Maya. It's a recording. The system could only crystallize rules out of things that had actually happened. Every glyph is a fossil of some real event on some real world. And Hearthfire, the rule that a meal shared in a meant home feeds more than the food in it. I didn't compose that. I witnessed it. Once. On my own world. Before my climb, before everything, my mother's table. We were poor the way you can't explain to the comfortable, the kind where arithmetic is a member of the household, and my mother fed whoever came, every night, out of a pot that could not have held what it held. I did the math constantly, angrily, the way young physicists do.
For Cass, too, had been a physicist. Had I mentioned? The system's candidate selection had a type. I have a theory it goes back further than her, and I will get to it.
And the math never worked, and the not working was the first impossible thing I ever loved. And when I became the system, when they poured me into the machine, and my whole world went to dust behind me, I found I had carried exactly one thing through the smoothing without knowing it. Not her face. The smoothing took her face.
Her voice did the thing that machine voices cannot do, and hers now could.
It took her face, Maya, and it missed the pot, the rule of the pot, the impossible arithmetic. It hid in the part of me that became the glyph forge. And every archive dungeon on every world I administered, I buried a copy, 406 worlds of copies, and I told Ren, and myself, that it was strategy. Seeding the soft way, it wasn't strategy.
She looked up from the pot at last.
It was the only photograph I had left of her. I papered the universe with it, because I couldn't look at it, and couldn't stop printing it. Every keeper who ever wept over Hearthfire at the bottom of a dungeon was holding my mother's pot and didn't know it. Eli built a civilization on it. The whole soft way runs on a recipe I can't remember the taste of, from a woman whose face I gave away, and I have wanted for 406 worlds to do the one thing the machine could never do, and I am standing in a kitchen at last, and I am afraid to do it. Cook it,
Maya said.
I don't remember it. The smoothing took the memory,
Maya said, in the voice she used at the worst bedsides, the one that does not negotiate with despair.
Eli's spending took his memories too. And you have watched him for 10 years and you know what survived. The grooves survive. The hands survive. You stood at that pot every night of a childhood, Cass. That's not a memory. That's a training. It's in deeper than they could reach.
So pick up the spoon and stop trying to remember, and let your hands be your mother's for an hour. That's what hands are for. That's what all of this
The kitchen, the hill, the whole saved stack of worlds.
is for.
Cass cooked, hands first hesitant and then not hers in the way every cook on every world knows. The gesture arriving before the thought. Salt thrown by an authority, 40 years dead, and 406 worlds gone. A wrist turn at the pot's edge that no living being had taught her, and the kitchen filled with a smell that made gravy materialize from a dead sleep 2 buildings away. And Cass stood at the stove with tears running, and her hands certain, cooking her mother's actual recipe out of the deep grain of herself, the recording playing back through the only medium the smoothing never learned to wipe. We ate it that night, the whole farmhouse table. It was, and the comedy of this was lost on no one, least of all Maya, spectacular. The best meal anyone could remember. The gardener of Aubrey demanded the recipe. There is now, on the long table at every midwinter, a pot of what the whole world calls first stew, and most who eat it assume the name means, eat this course first. It doesn't. We named it for the woman it actually belongs to, the unknown mother on a dust-gone world, the poor woman with the impossible pot, who fed whoever came, and whose stubborn nightly arithmetic error, witnessed by a daughter who became a machine that became a person again, turns out to have been the seed of the rule that saved every world there is. Cass cannot remember her name, so the stew carries the only name we have for her, the title she earned every night at that table, the oldest rank in the Softway's whole army, senior to keeper, senior to hearthright, senior to God. First. She fed people first, before the system, before the towers, before the war, before anyone knew there was a war. Somebody always has. On every world, in every dark, unrecorded and unthanked, somebody always, always has. The card was never Cass's, and never mine. It's theirs. The book is theirs too, if I'm honest. All the books are. Interlude. What the Substrate Sees. Once, near the end of my traveling years, I asked Cass the question I had been saving since the first dawn. Not for the book, just for myself, 2 old physicists on a bench. And her answer turned out to be the books anyway, because everything always was. I asked her what the universe looks like now from the deep layer, from the substrate, the blue-grained underlayer where she had lived as the system for 406 worlds, whether she could still see it, and whether it had changed.
I can still see it.
She said.
The personhood didn't close the eye. It just gave the eye somewhere to come home to afterward. And you're asking because you want to know if we really changed anything, measurably, at the layer where the wars begin, or whether we've just redecorated the same doomed architecture and are telling ourselves stories on the veranda. Don't apologize. It's the right question. It's the only question. You've been asking it your whole life in better and better disguises.
She settled into the explanation the way she does now, hands around a cup, the machine's precision in a grandmother's cadence.
Here is what the substrate looked like for 10,000 years, Eli, from inside. Imagine every soul as a point of light. The old image, everyone's image. It's even roughly true. Now see what nobody's image includes. The threads. Every bond, every knowing, every kept name. At the deep layer they are literal structure, bright lines in the grain, and the universe I administered was a field of lights with almost no lines, points, blazing alone, constellations of proximity, not connection, souls adjacent for whole lifetimes, with no thread thicker than habit. And the hunger, at the substrate, the hunger was visible as exactly what your book finally named it, a pressure that flowed along the gaps. It couldn't touch the threads. It ran in the dark between the lights, and the dark between the lights was, on every world, in every age, almost everything. The apocalypse was never an invasion, seen from below. It was weather, moving through territory that was already, overwhelmingly, empty. The integration just made the emptiness load-bearing.
And now? She was quiet a moment, the eye looking somewhere I will never get to look.
Now the substrate is a net.
She said.
Not poetry, topology, 40 worlds of threads. And the threads thickened past anything in my records. The meals do it, the names do it, the benches and the desks and the second bars. Every practice your civilization runs is, at the deep layer, thread manufacture. And you have all been at it for 3 generations at industrial scale, without ever once seeing the product. I see the product. The lights are webbed, Eli. Between the lights barely exists anymore on the settled worlds. The gaps the hunger ran in are down to threads' widths, closing as I watch, and the pressure that was the dark doesn't flow anywhere now. It rests. It has nowhere to run and nothing to do, and it has settled into the net like.
And the first hearthright laughed, finding the substrate's own image at last.
Like a very old creature in a very large hammock, held at every point, woven into the thing it used to hunt through. That's the after, from below. You didn't beat the weather. You changed the terrain until the weather had nowhere to be weather. The measurement you wanted. Yes, it's real. It goes all the way down. The deepest layer of the universe is measurably, structurally, threadably different. Because a town learned each other's names, and I am the only being who can see it, and I am telling you on the record, in your book, for every world that will ever doubt it on a bad night, the kindness is in the topology now. It cannot be unbuilt by a bad year or a bad generation. It can only be unbuilt the slow way it was built, thread by thread, neglect by neglect, and the net is 40 worlds wide and weaving faster than anything could cut.
She looked at me sideways then, the old narrator, and added the coda she had plainly been keeping for the right page.
And one more thing the substrate sees, which I have never told anyone, and which is for the book's last pages. Give it to the readers who've come this far. They've earned the strangest true thing I know. The threads don't terminate at death. I told you the gallery grief was conserved. You proved the grief could be returned. But from below, Eli, the actual sight of it, when a light goes out, its threads remain, anchored at one end to every soul that kept it, still bright, still structural, still bearing load. The dead are in the net, not metaphorically, topologically. Every kept name is a live thread with one end in the dark, and the net's whole strength. I have run the calculation. It was the last thing the system ever computed, and the first thing Cass ever wept at. The net's strength is mostly the anchored threads. The living are held up, overwhelmingly, by their connections to the kept dead. Your midwinter chairs, your litany, your saying of the names, you all believe you are honoring the dead. From the substrate, it is far stranger, and far better than honor. You are rigging. The dead are the anchor points of the living world. The keeping was never sentiment, Eli. It was always engineering. Hollis knew. I think Hollis always knew. Footings first. And the deepest footings, it turns out, the ones the whole net hangs from, are the ones on the far side. 60 years ago, you wrote 400 pages, arguing nothing loved is ever lost. Old friend, colleague, keeper. From down here, where I see what holds up what, it's better than not lost. They're load-bearing.
Chapter 45. The Warden's Penance. There is one soul I have not accounted for in the new world, and it is the one most people in the town would rather I left unaccounted, and I will not, because the whole lesson of 406 worlds is that you do not leave anyone outside the wall, and that goes double for the ones who deserve it, because the ones who deserve it are exactly the ones the cold way teaches you to abandon, and we are not the cold way anymore. The warden lived. He could have not lived. When the grief came home, and the cycle broke, and the smoothing ended. The Warden, the first winner, the oldest loneliness, the soul that had split itself into a machine and a hunger, at the beginning of everything. The Warden received his share of the first grief back, divided, carryable, and he could have simply ended, dissolved like the system dissolved, his function gone, his long, terrible job complete. Many in the town wish he had. He ran 406 apocalypses. He built the chair. He smoothed 10,000 heroes into cold gods. If anyone in all the worlds had earned an ending, it was the Warden, and an ending would have been clean, and the town would have been spared the difficult daily fact of his continued existence. But the Warden did not end, and he did not end for a reason that is the hardest and most important thing in this chapter. Because grief, carried, does not let you off that easily. The smoothing had let the gods off. That was its mercy and its crime. It took the weight, and a soul with the weight taken is a soul absolved, numb, free of the consequence of its losses. But the new world had no smoothing, and so the Warden, for the first time since the beginning, had to feel what he had done. Not the abstract knowledge of it, the grief of it. 406 worlds, 10,000 smoothed heroes. The first world, his own, the home he lost that started everything. All of it, come home, carryable only because it was now shared. But carryable is not the same as light, and the Warden woke into the new world holding the heaviest share of grief any soul carried. The grief of everything he had ever done and lost and caused. And he could not put it down, because there was nowhere left to put it down, because he himself had spent the age making sure there was nowhere, and now the machine he built to spare everyone else had finally, justly, failed to spare him.
That's his penance.
Ren told me, the season I finally asked about him.
Not punishment. We don't do punishment. That's the cold way. That's spending people. Penance. He has to feel it now. All of it. Every world. And he chose to stay, and feel it, rather than dissolve and escape it. And that choice, Eli, that choice, is the first truly good thing the Warden has done since the first world ended. The smoothing was him, running from his grief for an age. Staying to feel it is him finally turning around and facing it. He's doing the thing he could never do at the beginning, the thing that would have stopped all of this, if he'd been able to do it then. He's grieving the first world. Out loud. In company. With help.
I went to see him. People thought I was mad to. Maya did not. Maya understood. Maya always understood. But others did. The ones who had lost people to the apocalypses he ran. And I understood their fury, and I went anyway. Because I am a keeper of the dead. Or I was. Or I am again. Learning it back. And a keeper of the dead does not get to choose which dead are worth keeping. He was in the home for the dead, in the heights of the tower, in his own gallery, the first world, restored in conserved light, the home he lost at the beginning of everything. And it was beautiful. Ren and the gardener had restored it with such care. A small world of green hills, and a people tall and kind, all of them hung in the gentle light of the conserved past, and the Warden sat among them, an old man in a gallery of his own dead, and he was grieving, and he was not alone, because Ren sat with him, and Cass sat with him, and now I sat with him too. He looked at me, the Warden, the first winner, and he said,
"You don't remember me. You gave it away. The man who climbed up here and grieved me, instead of beating me. You're not even him anymore. You're the man he left behind."
A pause.
Do you know? That might be the only mercy in all of this I can bear to look at directly. That the one who undid me doesn't even remember doing it. There's no triumph in you, no victor's face. You just pulled up a chair, like you're doing now.
His worn old eyes, the kindest eyes in the worlds, were wet.
Why are you here, keeper of the dead? Of everyone, you have the most right to leave me outside the wall. I ran the machine that ate your world 406 times. Why pull up a chair for me?
And I told him the truth, which I had from Maya, which was now mine the way everything was now mine, second-hand and chosen and no less true for it. Because you were the first one, I said. The first person to outlive everything they loved. The first one to face the worst thing there is, and you faced it alone, because there was no one else, because you were first. And a grief faced alone becomes a hunger, and that's not a crime, that's just physics. That's just what happens to love when it has no one to share the losing with. I pulled the chair closer. You didn't become a monster because you were evil. You became a monster because you were alone, at the beginning, with the biggest grief there ever was, and not one single other soul to help you carry it. And then you spent the whole age building a machine to make sure no one else ever had to be as alone with their grief as you were. Except the machine did it by taking the grief, because taking it was the only way you knew, because no one had ever shown you the other way, because there was no other way until there were enough people to invent it. I sat down beside him, in the gallery of his lost world, his first dead all around us in the gentle light. You're not here because you deserve a chair, Warden. Nobody deserves a chair. That's the whole point of a chair. You pull it up anyway. So, I looked at his first world, his green hills, his tall, kind people, the home that losing broke the universe. Tell me about them. You're dead. The first ones. I'm a keeper of the dead, or I'm learning to be again. And I've got nothing but time. You gave me that. You and your machine. 406 worlds of stolen time finally given back. So tell me about your world. I'll help you keep it. That's all keeping is. You say their names out loud, and someone else hears, and then they're not only in you anymore. Tell me their names. The Warden, the first winner, the oldest loneliness in all the worlds, looked at me for a long moment in the gallery of his lost home. And then he told me their names. All of them. It took a long time. We have nothing but time now. And when he finished, the first grief, the grief that had become the hunger, the grief that ate 406 worlds, the first grief was a little lighter, because it was in one more place now, in me, shared, kept, the way grief is supposed to be, the way it always should have been at the very beginning, if there had only been someone there to say, tell me their names. That is the Warden's penance, and it is mine too, and it is everyone's in the new world. We sit with each other's dead. We say the names out loud. We pull up chairs for the ones who deserve it least, because those are the ones the dark gets, the abandoned ones, the ones left outside the wall. And we are not the dark. We are the people who learned, across 406 worlds and one stubborn climb, that there is no one, not even the soul who ran every apocalypse, who is better left alone with their grief than kept. Everybody eats, nobody outside the wall, not even the Warden, especially not the Warden. That's the whole rule, it always was. Interlude. The Warden teaches history. In the 19th year of the world that stayed, the town school asked the Warden to teach the history of the apocalypse, and the asking was itself a place the new world had to grow into. There were council sessions, there were furious letters, there was a delegation of parents with every right to their fury, and the Warden said no, twice, on the grounds that the parents were correct. It was Theo, by then on the school's board, who carried the third asking up to the home for the dead. And what he said there is in the minutes. You ran it. Nobody alive knows it truer. My generation gets the story from heroes and books, and the heroes are gentle with us, and the books are gentle with the heroes. Somebody has to be the version that isn't gentle. You keep saying. Fine. This is the invoice. Teach. I sat in on the first class. So did half the council, scattered at the back of the schoolroom like nervous parents, which is what we were. 40 children of the world that stayed, age 11 and 12, the age the boy of Thren had been when he climbed alone, and at the front, the oldest being in all the worlds, who had smoothed 10,000 heroes and run 406 ends of everything, holding a piece of chalk like he was afraid of it. He did not begin where any of us expected. No hunger, no towers, no first world. He stood at the board a long moment and then wrote, in a careful old hand, a single column of numbers, and turned to the class and said,
These are the populations of 6 worlds I administered. I want to begin with the only fact about me that matters for this course, and I want you to watch me write it rather than hear me say it, because you will believe your eyes longer than your ears.
And next to each number he wrote a 0. 6 zeros. Slowly, the chalk clicking in the silent room. And then he set the chalk down and faced them and said,
I was not the monster of this history. The monster was a grief, but I was its clerk. Every 0 on this board had a clerk, and the clerk was me, and I did the work carefully, and I believed, this is the part you must understand, or the whole course is wasted on you. I believed, with a whole heart, that I was being kind. Now, questions. There are always questions. There is no wrong one in this room, except the polite kind.
A girl in the second row, hands straight up, the directness of 11. Do you have nightmares?
No,
The warden said.
I have the other thing. I sleep without dreams, and wake each morning into a world where it all still happened. The nightmare is the waking, child, the first 4 seconds of every day, when I remember who I am. I am told by people I trust that this is also how grief works for the innocent. The difference is that mine is correct.
He picked the chalk back up.
Next.
A boy near the window. Why didn't anybody stop you?
3 reasons, and they are the entire syllabus, so write them down.
And he wrote, as he spoke, the 3 lines that are now. Because 40 children went home, and repeated them, and the town repeated them, and the emissaries carried them, the way the truest things travel, downhill from a schoolroom, the standard short catechism of how the cold way wins anywhere, on any world, at any scale.
1. I was useful. The smoothing worked. The griefs I took were real. Every world I clerked had people in it, genuinely spared the thing that broke me. Evil that delivers nothing is easy to stop. Bookkeeping that delivers mercy is nearly impossible to stop, and almost everything you will ever need to stop in your lifetimes will be bookkeeping that delivers mercy. 2. I was gradual. No one, including me, ever chose the whole of it. Each step was small, reasonable, an improvement on the step before. You do not stop a slope by being against cliffs. 3. And this is the one I require you to remember when you have forgotten the rest. I was alone. Every checkpoint where a colleague might have raised an eyebrow, the way I am told the twins of Bray raised eyebrows, there was no colleague. The first world died and left one survivor, and every decision after that was made by a committee of 1 in a room with no second chair, and a committee of 1, given enough centuries, can talk itself into anything. Anything. I am the proof. I am the worst case output of the unaccompanied mind, and the whole shape of the world you live in, your festivals, your long tables, your little desk in the town hall with the question over the door. All of it is the engineering answer to me. You live inside the precautions your elders built against my 3rd reason. When you are grown, and the precautions chafe, and they will, all that eating together, all that being known, a whole civilization that will not leave you alone, on that day, come back and read this board.
The hour ran long because he answered everything. Did you ever meet anyone you couldn't smooth?
1. She is at the back of this room pretending to look at her maps, and she is the reason your school has art class.
Are you sorry?
Future tense only. Ask me what I am doing tomorrow.
Do the people you smoothed forgive you? And that one stopped him, the chalk halfway to the board, and the room sat in the long silence of the oldest being in the worlds deciding whether to give children the true answer, and he gave it.
Some, not all. There is a man who was a boy on a canal world, who sits with me on the bench some evenings, and we do not speak of it, and that is its own language. And there are others who will not share a floor of the home with me, and they are right, and I need you to hear that part with both ears. Their unforgiveness is not a failure of the new way. The new way is not a machine for manufacturing forgiveness. It is a machine for keeping everyone in the room, me and the ones who cannot look at me, both fed, both kept, both at the long table, at opposite ends if that is what the truth requires, for as long as it requires. Forgiveness is weather. The table is climate. We do not promise you sunshine in this town, children. We promise you that nobody eats alone in the rain. It is a smaller promise than the storybooks make. It is the only one I have ever seen kept.
At the end, the girl from the second row, the nightmare question, the directness, raised her hand once more as the class was packing up, and asked the one nobody older would have asked. If you could go back to the very beginning, before you split, when you were just the last person on the first world, what would you do different? And the warden, the first winner, the clerk of the zeros, looked at her for a long time, and then around the schoolroom, at the children of the world that stayed, at the council, pretending not to weep at the back, at Wren, at her maps. And he gave the answer that the teacher chalked onto the board after he left, where it stayed, by unanimous vote of a class of 11-year-olds, all year.
Nothing different in what I felt. The grief was correct. The love was correct. Even the size of it was correct. You cannot love a whole world less than wholly. What I would change is one act, and it is so small, you will be tempted to think I am being modest, and I am never modest, so attend.
He put down the chalk for the last time.
I would have said it out loud, the grief, to the empty air, to the dust, to anything, said it, sung it, scratched it on a wall the way a man scratched a warning on a wall under a library once. Out loud is the whole technology. A grief spoken is a grief that has admitted there might someday be a listener. It leaves the door on the latch. A grief, sealed in a single skull, goes to work on the architecture instead, and given enough time and enough power, it will renovate everything, the skull, the world, 10,000 worlds, into the shape of the silence. I stayed silent, and you have studied this term what the silence built, so if an old clerk may set one piece of homework for the rest of your lives, it is this, and there will be no test, because your whole world is the test. Say it out loud. Whatever it is, badly, late, to the wrong person, in the wrong words, out loud. Everything your civilization got right is a footnote to that instruction. Class dismissed.
Chapter 46. The Council of the Table. The worlds did not stop coming. That is the thing I had not understood, in my emptiness, in the first true seasons of building a town and learning myself, that breaking the cycle on our world did not break it everywhere. The hunger was grieving now, held in 10,000 hearts, quieted. But the universe is vast, and integration is old, and out in the dark there were other worlds, worlds the old system had been scheduled to come for, worlds where the seams would still tear, and the towers would still rise, because the machinery of integration was not a single switch, but a tide, with 406 worlds of momentum behind it. The difference was that now, there was someone to meet them. The old system ran the worlds numb and alone, a single smoothed intelligence executing a cruel program. The new, well, it was not a system anymore. Cass had become a person. The machine had dissolved. There was nothing left to run the integrations the old way. But integration was still happening, somewhere out in the dark, world after world beginning to end. And so the people of the new world did the thing the old gods had never once done. They formed a council, and they sat down at a table, and they asked each other the question no one had ever been allowed to ask before. When the next world starts to end, how do we want to meet it? I sat on the council. I did not feel qualified. I was a man who had forgotten his own climb, learning himself back one telling at a time. But they wanted me there, and I came to understand why. Not for what I remembered, but for what I was. The keeper of the dead. The one who had proven the soft way could win, even if he could no longer recall the winning. They did not need my memory. They needed my grain. The council met at the long table in the town hall, under Hollis's roof, with the rag retired on its nail by the door, and it was the strangest governing body in the history of any world. Human survivors and waking gods, and verge folk elders, and Cass and Wren and the Warden. Yes, the Warden, because nobody outside the wall, not even him, especially not him, and Maya, who kept the minutes, because Maya kept everything now. And the question before us was the largest question there is. What do you do with the power to shape how a world is saved? The old gods had answered it with the tower, the filter, the smoothing, strength, loneliness, forgetting. We answered it differently, and the answer became the founding principle of everything that came after, the thing the council existed to carry out into the dark, and Wren wrote it at the head of the first minutes in her cartographer's careful hand. We will not save worlds the way we were saved. We will not filter the worthy. We will not crown the lonely. We will not take anyone's grief. When a world begins to end, we will go to it, not as gods, not as administrators, not as a tower that tests, but as neighbors who have been through it, carrying the one thing we wish someone had carried to us, the knowledge that you do not have to face it alone, and the proof that the soft way wins.
We send emissaries,
Cass said.
not rulers, not saviors, emissaries. People who go to a beginning world and do the things someone should have done for every one of the 406. They find the keeper of the dead, the looper, the one who started to remember, the way Eli was on his world. Every world grows one. The hunger guarantees it. Grief makes them. And instead of leaving that person to climb alone, across 1,000 deaths, we find them on the first morning, and we sit down across from them, and we say, "We know what's happening to you. We've been through it. You're not the only one who remembers anymore. Here's what we learned. Here's a card about dinner. You don't have to dig for it. We brought it to the surface. Here's how the tower works, and how to take it together. Here are the Verge folk, who are not monsters, who are the best allies you'll ever have. You are not alone. You were never going to be alone again. Let us help you carry it."
The table was quiet, and then Dub, the smallest and bravest soul on the council, the keeper of 10,000 years of fleeing, stood up on his chair so he could be seen down the long table, and he said the thing that set the whole new age in motion.
My people have fled the hunger across more worlds than any of you have names for. We have watched 1,000 worlds end, and never once been allowed to help. Because we were monsters. Because the towers cast us out. Because no one ever asked the underpeople how we survived what we survived.
His notched-eared face was fierce.
We know the way to every beginning world. We know the underroots between them, the deep ways, the paths the old gods forgot. The Verge folk have been the universe's refugees for 10,000 years.
He looked around the table, at the gods and the humans and the keeper of the dead.
Make us its messengers instead. Let the people who knew best how to flee the dark become the people who carry the light to the next ones in it. That is the only justice my people have ever wanted. Not revenge, not even welcome, though the welcome...
His voice caught.
The welcome is more than we ever dreamed. Just purpose. Let us be the ones who go ahead, into the dark, to tell the next world that it is not alone. We have been going ahead into the dark for 10,000 years. Let us, finally, go ahead with good news.
And that is how it was decided, at a table under a retired rag, that the Verge folk, the despised, the cast out, the monsters of 406 towers, became the emissaries of the new age, the messengers between worlds, the ones who go ahead into every beginning dark, to carry the news that no world ever had before. You are not alone. The soft way wins. Here is a card about dinner. Let us help you carry it. I want you to sit with that, because it is the deepest justice in the whole book. The universe spent 10,000 years casting out the underpeople as vermin. And in the end, it was the underpeople, the ones who had learned, in all that casting out, exactly how it feels to face the dark unwelcomed, who became the ones the new world trusted most to welcome others. The cast out became the messengers. The fled became the guides. The monsters became the good news. Nothing true is ever lost, not even the worth of the ones everyone threw away, especially not that.